You know, at the end of one of my last questions of David, in talking and asking him about why he chose to use interview data, really speaks to one of the issues that we're going to engage in this panel, which is key issue. You know, we call it how much is that data in the window, but establishing the value and the quality of online and offline data, and establishing which sort of data matters most. The nature and the volume of the inputs now, offline, online, behavioral, transactional, social, mobile, really have created themselves a problem and a sort of new dark art of how to choose among the inputs and how to map data against specific goals and needs, let alone whether that data has the necessary quality and what that data is worth in what has now emerged as this new marketplace. To take the lead on this discussion, we have Jonathan Margulies, who is the Managing Director at Winterberry Group. Jonathan has led the Winterberry Group's development of its research and thought leadership, particularly in this topic of data. He is behind a long series of white papers, most recently a great white paper on data management platforms that helps clarify the market tremendously. He issues a series of quarterly economic analyses, works in collaboration with industry and trade associations around the world. Please welcome Jonathan Margulies.
Thank you very much, Steve. And thanks everybody for being here. We have a really dynamic panel assembled today of folks who are living and breathing data technology, and really the marketplace around the same to speak to that issue. Before we introduce them and then sort of delve right into the questions, kind of level set everyone's expectations for this conversation. I think so much of the opportunity about and around what we think of as big data for marketing applications is grounded in the base assumption that data is the fundamental driver, the fuel, if you will, of insights that may ultimately be used to empower better decision making, right? Better targeting, better engagement with consumers, and a host of other potential benefits. Now, depending on where you come from, and candidly, depending on your sophistication with respect to data, you may make that logical leap from insight to decision making, and you may be a little bit less mature, and you may think that data is the insight itself. I would caution that perhaps that's not accurate, but regardless, there's pretty wide consensus around the notion that data is the fuel that is going to ultimately drive value. Fuel, though, to take that analogy a little bit further, only works, it only drives value if there is an efficient marketplace built around it. You know, just as the fuel in your car would no longer drive value if it was either of particularly poor quality, maybe all the way back to the refinery level, or if it was priced at such a level economically that you simply couldn't afford to put it in your engine, and therefore decided that you were going to extract value by not getting in the car every morning. We have a similar situation today in the data world, where a number of converging developments, the shift in consumer attention and interest from offline to digital channels, the rapid emergence really of an entire industry built to support advanced digital applications, and the need and the growing recognition to identify and engage with audiences no matter where they go across all those channels has sort of put us at the position of having to reconcile that marketplace for data, and the way we capture it, the way we use it, and ultimately the way we value it and perpetuate a long-term defensible marketplace, a value, if you will, for those assets. And so that's what we're here to talk about today. As I said before, we have a great panel primarily from what we look at as the supply side of the data and technology industry, the folks that are in the weeds of this every day. And I think just to kick off, I can ask each of you guys, maybe in order, to briefly introduce yourselves, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'm Richard Frankel, president and founder of Rocket Fuel. Rocket Fuel is a company that uses artificial intelligence and some other technology to help marketers get value for their digital spend with big data. So we're going to talk about how we do that today.
Hi, my name is Mukund Ramachandran. I'm the general manager of video and brand solutions for DataXu. DataXu is a SaaS platform that operates in media decisioning and data analytics.
Hi, I'm John Simpson, Managing Director at Blue State Digital. and I oversee our office in DC. And we are more on the buy side of things, but we're a full-service digital agency and technology company, and we work with a variety of clients from politics to nonprofits and advocacy groups and brands and businesses. And our, in its simplest terms, our goal is to work with clients and figure out how to use digital as a tool to build and establish and build relationships with the people that mean the most to them and get them to take meaningful actions.
Hi, I'm Brian Smith. I'm a director of strategy and analytics with Sapient Nitro, an agency with roots in technology consulting. I'm also the data science lead for the Sapient Nitro and Target Digital Innovation Center in San Francisco.
Thanks. And I'm Marcus Tewksbury. I'm a Global Vice President of Product Strategy at Experian. I guess here my voice would be around kind of CRM. My focus for most of my career has been partnering with retailers and other direct-to-consumer marketers on figuring out how to leverage all their data to drive connected communications with customers. And today I now help translate that for Experian and the rollout of our cross-channel marketing platform. Great.
Thank you guys very much. To kick off the conversation, I have what is admittedly something of a softball question for each of you, but it's something that I think, given your respective backgrounds, has the potential to offer us a lot of insight on how people think about data very broadly and how they think about it as something to be valued and perhaps traded as a commodity. And that question's simple. When you think about data, how you use it, and the metrics you assign to it, what is it? What is its core purpose? What are the purpose to which it can be used most effectively? And when you talk to your clients and your partners, are you effectively talking a common language with them, or does that vary? So maybe go in order, and we'll take the conversation from there.
Okay. First of all, what is it? Well, the wonderful thing about data is that we didn't just invent it in the last few years. Actually, even before there was a computer, there was lots and lots of data. It's just information about the world. So data is everywhere, and it's just a way of describing what we're doing and how we're doing it and how we're interacting. So it's very, very broad what data really is. And so when we talk to our customers, what we really focus on is business goals. So we try to speak in the language of what matters to a brand. What are their business goals? How are they trying to engage with consumers? What are they selling? How are they selling it? And that should be the starting point. And then the question is, what data can we go find to help them achieve those goals, and how can we help them understand it? And that's how we kind of start to draw the connections. And when we start, when you start with a client's business, then they start from a place of comfort, something that they're very familiar with and that they know a lot about. If you start with complicated words about data and models and algorithms and correlations, then you push people out of their comfort zones and makes it for a much harder conversation.
So from our perspective, I think data is anything that helps you understand customers better. I mean, obviously, Richard gave us the big, broad answer. In the marketing context, that's our view of the world, is anything that helps you understand customers better. And you kind of use this one of two ways, largely. You can use this understanding of customers to better show them ads, to influence business outcomes, number one. Or you can use this to help customers understand who their customers are. So that's kind of the prism we look at. Basically, what is it that we know about a user or a customer or a consumer that can A, help you A, do better ads, or B, understand who your best customers are?
I think, I would echo what's been said. I think when we think about data, it's what information, or the best data that we have is what is information that we can either make a decision on or take an action around. And we work across a variety of different platforms, but the primary ones are social, email, websites, and advertising. And so I think we sort of think about data in the context of there's targeting data, which I think is a lot of what probably we'll talk about today, of like how do you go out and find people and bring them in and find the people that are likely to engage with you and likely to be interested in what you have to say or what you're looking to offer them. And then there's more of like the performance data, I guess, is once you found those people, what do you do with them? What message do you serve to them? What content? What sort of user path are you taking them along? And so I think that some of that is coming from third parties, some of that is first party, but isolating, what pieces of that are going to give you a nugget of information that you can then make a decision or take an action on. And I think like that the objective defining piece of it is huge. I think that big data as a phrase is obviously on everyone's mind, and it's sort of like, it'll be the year of big data probably for 10 more years, the same as it's been for mobile or social. And it's like figuring out what do you want to do? What are you going to do with this? How are you going to use it to move your business forward? And if you can't answer that question, then the data becomes meaningless. So I think it's putting it into a context.
Yeah, so to the question of what is data, most simply stated to me, data is a collection of observations on some complex system that people are interested in understanding in a way that you can't understand by just simple observation. So you design an experiment in essence, and ideally, although not always, the data are collected with that experiment in mind so that there's some method to the madness. You're not just collecting the data for no purpose, although this is also happening in part because people are afraid that if they don't collect the data, that they're losing something, that they're losing value by not collecting the data. My experience, however, is that more directed data collection efforts are an important aspect of the data itself and in realizing the value of the data.
What he said, pretty much. But the couple of caveats to Brian's thing is, from a definitionally, absolutely, but just put in, it's all about the customer. So everything that you collect, those experiments, everything that you're doing is about getting new insight or something specific to the customer. Something else I would throw out is, in terms of thinking about how you should be approaching data as your organization, think about it, two different camps of data: expressed data and inferred data. So the express data is stuff that you gain directly from your clients. They've given to you, they've shared that information during a direct experience with your brand. Or inferred data, stuff that's provided in the marketplace that augments, enrich, or in some other way is used to kind of integrate other points that you have. So expressed or inferred data.
Great. I think what we can take away from all these responses is first and foremost customer insights and the ability to both identify and then engage at a more meaningful level with those customers at any stage in their purchase or engagement cycle, if you will, is absolutely critical. But likewise, the fact that data itself is a concept and even something very, very tangible in the marketplace today can be deployed to many, many purposes and is obviously aggregated from many sources. That all said, we live in the real world. We have to buy things, and for the most part, people require hard script currency in exchange for the things that we wish to buy, which gives rise to the need for a marketplace for data, and with it, the need to assign a specific value to a given piece of information, however you qualify that by the unit. That kind of leads into sort of the drilling down into this valuation question, and that is when you think about how data is valued at a high level, what are the metrics, the benchmarks that you commonly deploy or your clients commonly deploy to value that data? And do you think that, at least for today's purposes, in terms of building an efficient marketplace, those are suitable to support the real economical use of data over time? And I'll let any one of you guys answer this first who feels like it.
So I'll take a crack at it. I think this question is around value of data, right? What we see is that data's value comes largely from two areas. Scarcity is one. Ability to influence business outcomes is the other. Right? Obviously, availability is a key part of it. We have to be able to buy it first. Today, I'd say more data is bought and transacted on the basis of scarcity and availability. And there are some specific advertiser verticals that come to mind. Less so on business outcomes. And I think folks like what Sapient are doing and basically literally using data sciences as an approach and saying, how can you use data to to influence business outcomes. I think that's where the market ought to go. So I guess a short answer to your question is, I mean, these are the two axes of value today. Predominantly, value is traded on the basis of scarcity and availability, and I think it's moving towards the direction of value based on how it influences business outcomes.
So at Experian, a key driver for us is the ability to help our marketers and our clients connect whatever their spend is going to be to the ability to create revenue from it. So the monetization of the marketing spend, so whether it's a digital online spend, converting that and helping understand how it impacts in-store sales. At the end of the day, however much you spend on data needs to be derived from and based on how much money you can make from it.
Let me sort of respond to both of those points for just a second with a brief follow-up. Sort of inherently, what you can do with data and the value that you can extract from it is going to vary very, very substantially across not just the user, whether it's the agency or the marketer, but also the use case to which that marketer is deploying the information. So whereas the marketer may have a good sense of what they want to pay for that data, that may not necessarily align with the value that the compiler, the originator, if you will, of the information thinks is fair market. Now, fair market is at the end of the day what the buyer is willing to pay, I guess. But sort of a question there is there a need to reconcile those interests in the market now, or are we still, frankly, too immature in the way we think about those use cases, in the way that data is deployed to build sort of an industry standard around valuation?
I'll come out and say that I don't think there ever will be an industry standard for valuation of data, and here's why. Right now, we're in a really exciting time about data, and one of the things that's most exciting about it is that no one understands the value of all the data. And most people who understand value of data understand the value of a very, very little bit of data. There is a huge amount of, in the digital world, there's a huge amount of data running around, and the sellers of that data themselves understand very little the value of that data. And so that's an exciting kind of marketplace because lack of transparency and lack of information creates opportunities for smart people to figure out how to add value. Imagine the stock market with no prices and randomized ticker symbols so that you did not know what companies the tickers were associated with. If you were smart, the first thing you would probably do is not invest. But if you thought about it a little bit, you might come up with some clever way of figuring out how to associate value and what prices you should pay for that stock. And if you thought you could do it better than other folks, you might be able to make a lot of money. And that is the state of the quote-unquote data marketplace of today. Although there is, I put it in quotes because there's no single data marketplace. There's lots of data markets. And what's happening is, and what all of us up here on stage represent, are lots of different approaches to trying to assess and understand the value of data. And when we figure it out, we don't share it with each other. We share it with our customers, and that's about it. And we see that ability to understand the value of data as incredibly valuable proprietary information that we use to power our businesses. So, like, the value of data is extremely hard to understand, but the reason for that is because if you can figure it out, it really is going to have a huge impact on what you're doing.
I think the perspective we take when we're thinking about investing on the data side is that I agree that it's relative and it's variable based on who you are as a client or an organization or what your campaign is and what your goal is. And because there's so much technology behind all this data, there's also all this analytics and tracking. And so the value proposition to go into an exchange or an auction type of marketplace and be able to buy and sell something in real time is that you can learn very quickly how valuable it will be to you for your given purpose. And so I'm never going to go in and say I'm willing to pay a premium for long-term data set without actually testing that out and seeing how it works for me. I think there's a subset of like big brands and Fortune 50 type companies that can pull in massive reams of data and understand over the long term like consistent patterns. But when you're in more of a campaign cycle or you're on an individual brand campaign, that doesn't necessarily apply to other things. So it is much more about real time, and it's about what's working and what's not, and then you start investing based on actual results.
Let me ask each of you guys to kind of free response to this question. When you think about those parallel markets for data today and all the sources of information that are available on the market, how well valued do you think they are in aggregate? And are you getting quality, are you getting actionability from that information that you really need?
No. Would be my short answer. I mean, I think there's like a massive, there's a major education issue in the market. Like, there's people that are selling it and people that are buying it have no idea what they're selling or buying. I mean, there are folks that are actually aggregating and analyzing and like putting together the data modeling, and they know what they're talking about. But when you're sitting in a room with folks that are actually signing the IO or the contract, half the time they're just like, we're doing a big data buy. Like, we got our line item, it's fine, I can sell that through really easily. And there's, you know, there's very few people that I think really understand how it works. And then on the reporting side, a lot of times the sell will be, we can find the exact audience you want to talk to at the exact right time, you know, based on when it's raining on a Tuesday in New Hampshire, and she's a female with a cat, and she likes hybrids and watches like Good Morning America. And then you get the report back, and it's like, you know, for us, like on a fundraising client, for example, we'll test all these advanced segments, and then oftentimes we'll get a report back, and it says, you know, your ideal audience is a suburban, affluent female who's above the age of 50. And it's like, that's not an insight. That's not big data.
Right.
So I think that I don't know how to solve the education issue. I think it's not an easy thing to understand. But I think some more transparency and just better level setting at the beginning of how are you going to use this? Like we said before, what's your objective? And then this is the right approach to take to the data marketplace. I think would probably lead to some solutions.
I think that if the buyers don't come to the marketplace with a specific set of questions in mind that they want to ask of the data, then it would be too easy for the sell side to charge some arbitrary amount without the buyer being able to actually make an evaluation of, you know, the data I'm buying, does it actually have the information I need to answer the questions that I'm asking? And more often than not, I see, like you said, there's just this push for, oh, we're getting data, we're going to get big data, we're making a big data play, and there's very little on the side of, you know, what questions do we intend to ask of the data? And until that happens, I'm not sure that either side will really have a good understanding of the value. And I wanted to bring up just one point to the earlier question, which is that there's an inherent cost of data in addition to the value. And I think, you know, a baseline price in a marketplace needs to start with understanding what the costs are to collect and acquire, store, and deliver the data. And then maybe as a baseline price, some multiple on that would be reasonable. But I don't think people are even doing that kind of cost accounting on the actual cost of the data today. And I think something like that would be important. And then moving forward from there, because there are so many different use cases, one of the things that we keep hearing here is that the inherent value of the data may be different depending on how you plan on using it. And I very much agree that that's true. And that leads to the idea of a potential, you know, rev share model. So if you buy data from me and I help you and maybe your analysts understand how to extract value from that data, then maybe I share in the revenue that you generate from that data. And it might be an interesting model for people to think about.
And I'll just say the antique roadshow. I mean, I think that's a way a lot of us walk into saying, how much is this data worth? Well, I know about as much of that as like my grandfather's Civil War rifle. I'll keep hitting on the point that from a brand marketer standpoint, if you're in the audience and you buy data, you have, and this has come up a little bit, like in any negotiation, you have to come to the table with an ability or an idea of what it's worth to you. Data is priced upon perceived value. It's not done as a bottom up, as a cost basis. Like, you definitely have to come armed to that conversation. One of the things that we talked about also is, and how do you come up with the right valuation metric? I think looking at data from a specific campaign window, like response window, is going to be a very difficult area to fully understand how valuable that data was. That somewhere you have to be focused on a metric inside your organization that is customer-based, that I'm looking over the life cycle of my customer in a period of year, frequency shopped, number of registrations for them, dollars spent, lifetime value. Does the data and the programs I'm executing impact the long-term relationship with that customer? So for that way, I'd be a strong argument to base your valuation metric to set your price on your data based upon that.
The one response I would say is, I think that because it's such a buzzword and it's something that everyone wants to be involved in, there's a huge opportunity, just regardless of how much you're pricing the data at, on the sales side, to be able to go into a major brand or a small level brand and sell a big data product. It's pretty, I don't want to say it's easy, but it's fairly easy. And I think the issue is that not everyone should be involved in the big data game, to your point. If you don't have the time to invest up front, if you're not going to be if you're not playing the long game to understand how data works for you over the long term, then maybe it's not the right play, and using basic contextual targeting or other type of more simple small data is really a more intelligent investment. But you won't sound as innovative when you talk to your boss or that sort of thing. And I think we see that with clients. Is it's like, we just invested in big data. Like, why isn't it working? I was like, well, we just started like on Tuesday. And I think there's that thing of, it's this amazing thing. There's PhDs and like NASA astronauts working on it. Like, it should be driving my business exponentially in no time. And it's just not the case. And so I think it's hard to have that conversation and maybe walk away from an investment or guide a client in another way when maybe what they really need is not what you're selling. But I think it's important, if we want to move the market forward, that those conversations happen.
So it's an interesting point that Brian made about rev share. I think that's it's a definitely interesting idea. Another thing maybe to move the market forward is, today a lot of data is transacted in binaries. I don't know if folks in the advertising, the digital space, you've seen RFPs for auto intender. Now, if I go to Ford.com and I spend 30 minutes pricing a car, I'm probably more valuable than somebody that just happened to click on a link to Edmunds.com, check out the new car and got out today. But first of all, I don't know really the auto intender. There is no scoring of that intender. It's a binary. Mm-hmm. Is it a yes or a no? Number one, okay, fair enough. Let's say the auto intender costs $2. If I'm running this on $10 video, that's a 20% incremental cost. If I'm running it on $2 display, it's a 100% incremental cost. So is the value of the data the same? Probably not. Sometimes we see stuff, people respond differently in different contexts, different layers. So it just feels like there is a lot of, which goes back to my earlier point, that the industry really needs to evolve and understand, like, even though not all data is created equally, and therefore it can't be valued equally, not all data is used equally, and therefore it can't be valued the same as well. So it's really a lot of, I think the industry needs to move ahead on all these fronts.
One thing that I think is really fun about what's happening now is that as much as we're talking about data here, every marketer that I see is actually already investing hugely in data and has been for years and years. Companies like Experian have been built on supporting companies to build that kind of infrastructure. And so I think the story of value of data is not so much about markets, but it's really about leveraging investments that have already been made and that are being continued through and will go on forever as companies build up data platforms and invest in storing the data. And the really hard questions are not so much about what is an individual piece of data worth, but I think the really hard questions are, how do we take advantage of these large masses of data and turn that into something that's easy to understand and usable by Joe Analyst or Joe Marketer, so that they can be freed up to do the really sophisticated, thoughtful, creative, strategic work instead of being mired in looking at all the details of the data. And as the industry gets those things right, really turning huge masses of data into something that's easy to use and understand, then all of this data infrastructure is going to become hugely more valuable.
You know, you bring up an interesting point, Richard, which sort of reminds me, and it's a common theme across both our conversation as well as many other conversations this week, and that is despite all the potential insight that data provides and the computing power technology allows us to tap into, you would think from afar that our ability to ascribe an ROI, if you will, from using data and do our own sort of advanced valuation calculations and to clearly substantiate what our big data investments are driving and bring that back to the CEO would be easy. And yet it's one of the most challenging parts of this whole equation. We hear it from marketers, and we hear it from folks in the tech sector and the supply side of the industry all the time, that despite all this potential, what they really need to do is build an internal business case for data and for the technology that comes along with it. And if only they can start demonstrating response at scale that they could measure, that all their problems would be solved. Now, maybe that's a little bit of an exaggeration or not, but I'm curious from you guys, because you deal with many of these advertisers day in and day out. Is anybody out there doing anything particularly interesting, I imagine somewhat bespoke, to ascribe value to data, whether it's bought in the market, if you will, or whether it's even their own data assets, which I guess you could argue are more valuable in many respects than what they could get from elsewhere?
I think everyone is working, I would almost say frantically, on putting the data into places they can use it, using it, and measuring the value of it, and doing that over and over again. I think there's a lot of work, and this is something that we're, with our clients, something we really work really hard on to help them understand the value of, more than anything else, their own data. We've collected this stuff for years. Is it any good? And so we are helping customers use it and value it, and that is really, really exciting in the marketplace. The only thing that is, a little bit challenging is that generally the better you are at understanding the value of data and the more valuable your data is, the less you're going to talk about it because you want to, keep the value for yourselves.
It doesn't make for good conference conversation, though, if you're not going to share. That's the problem.
We'll share.
No, the point you make is a good one. So we see this all the time, which is basically, we have a data management offering, and customers will say, okay, it's going to cost you $1 million. And customers will say, show me ROI for it. Okay, the ROI comes in the use cases of this data, right? The ROI comes in whether you're going to deploy it across digital media, whether are they your other touch points, how are you going to do this. The ROI doesn't write itself just in the context of data. It's about how you can apply the data either in your advertising or in your other customer touch points so as to drive better efficiencies in business outcomes, which is a result of your investment. People will really come out and say, as a standalone, show me that this investment's worth it, and it's really impossible to do. I mean, you need to put this data in the context of how you're going to use it.
I mean, from a fundraising standpoint, for a lot of our nonprofit clients, I think they have a tremendous amount of first-party data, and we have a technology platform that powers fundraising and email. And I think this probably doesn't fall. This is more in the small data side of things, but even just taking basic historical behavior and using that to inform how you communicate with somebody on an ongoing basis is fundamental, but it requires fairly sophisticated data analysis. If someone gave $5, ask them for 15. If someone gave 50, don't ask them for 5. Those kinds of things are so simple, but if you're not managing your own data and your own customer base correctly, whether you're a nonprofit or a brand, I think it's so valuable, but it's the use case, but then you can also throw that value away very quickly because you have so much to work with, and you could have this high value prospect or customer, and if you don't use it right, you've just washed it all away.
So independently as a vendor, as Experian, I can't tell you what the ROI on the data is going to be without partnering with you, because it has to come from your transaction repository. Where your sales are happening is the only place we can value the data. So whatever we're going to do, we're trying to connect to the customer, run a marketing program. At the end of the day, we have to be able to tie that back to how you're making money.
So a lot of our conversation here, for I think obvious reasons, has been driven by a lot of the change in the dynamics that are pacing the digital side of the data industry today, such as it exists. We kind of pull back a little in the perspective. I think we've all agreed that offline or traditional sources of data are likewise a very, very important piece of the equation. I'll leave you with a bit of a data point here. We did some back-of-the-envelope modeling about a year ago around what the approximate size of the offline data market is with respect to marketing compared to, let's say, the world of display advertising. And when you pull out all the spending on data, all the spending on analytics services and data hosting and data processing that comes along with it, every year, marketers in the U.S. spend about anywhere from $700 to $900 million on data for display advertising alone. They spend more than $10 billion on data connected just to the direct mail channel. So between their CRM for direct mail and acquisition lists. And in fact, there's a very mature industry built around that kind of data. Is there a way that we can reconcile how we collect, value, and deploy data for common use cases when we pull in both of those kinds of data in the future?
Well, it is becoming a mashup for the data. So like at Experian, we certainly stand at the forefront of understanding consumers on a global basis. I think for us, we're starting to see channel become more of a transparent view, information that we may be able to help you understand the customer, from things about summarized credit type information or whatever the variable may be. We're looking at making that absolutely seamless or frictionless across how you're going to deploy it from a marketing purpose.
I think the concern that comes up when you talk about integrating offline and online data is just the quality of it as it happens. I mean, I was trying to think of a good analogy, but it's sort of like, taking a fire hose to fill up, a tiny bottle. It's just stuff's all over the floor, and half the stuff that went in there is dirty and can't use it. So I think that's just something that people need to be cognizant of is what's the match rate going to be like? Then you start thinking about how you find those folks and how long is it going to take you to find the ones that you've matched, and will they actually see what you've put in front of them? And so you start to get to a point of diminishing returns. And if you're not, again, willing to invest the time and the resources, you're not going to extract any value from that. But the opportunity is huge. I mean, I think to take a $10 billion market and overlay that onto the measly couple $100 million.
Well, and part of the reality of the transformation of media is that everything is going digital, and so people are working hard to bring that offline data online, and a lot of the direct mail industry is centered around a bunch of companies that also have online businesses and digital businesses, and integrating. I actually think that integrating all of that data is hard, but integrating teams, having the email team and talk to the display team, talk to the search team, talk to the direct mail team. I mean, they might not even be in the same city. So integrating the data may be hard, but transforming business processes to take advantage of data being in more available in one place is even harder.
Yeah, I just wanted to strongly second that the reconciliation isn't so much on the side of the integration of the two types of data, but it's on the internal team's ability to actually leverage this integrated information for what they need to use it for. And that what I see as being one of the largest challenges is actually helping people understand that, Sapient Nitro talks about, being an omni-channel, delivery service. And clearly it's all moving toward digital, but there will always be room for maintaining this balance. And I think the integration within the company to make sure that the groups that need to use this data have access to it and know who's doing what with it is actually the harder piece.
So you guys all interact with marketers on a daily basis. As we wrap up here just in the last couple of minutes, if you had one piece of instructive counsel to offer a large enterprise sort of wrestling with these questions around value and quality and integration of data from both online and offline sources, and thinking through how they could best accomplish their business goals via data over the next few years, what's your one piece of counsel?
Look within first. I think a common theme for me, as I've been talking about, your ability to use all of this to effective means is based upon your ability to understand your customer with that express data that they've shared with you. You've got to figure out how to embrace the customer, take that data, make it the soul of what you do.
I would offer two suggestions, I guess. One is don't invest without first thinking about the questions you're going to ask. And I guess the other would be make sure that you've got accounting in place.
Hire a full-service digital agency to manage it for you. I think the education piece is the biggest one. Like whether it's looking within or hiring someone new, but have somebody in-house that gets it and has the experience and the intelligence to oversee the type of initiative, because it's a lot of work.
So I'll also have two things to say. First of all, don't be afraid. You have to do it. It's not a choice. So you have to do it. So don't be afraid. Embrace it. Number one. Number two, take a data sciences test and learn approach. Don't assign notional values to these things. Value is always dependent on business outcomes in your context. So take a test and learn approach, and then over the course of time, and if you do this right, you'll definitely be more competitive than your competitors are.
I guess the piece of advice I would give would be to open your eyes and look as far and wide as you can for new technology that's going to come to solve these problems. And the most interesting solutions are not about the capture and storage of data. You've all got that out the wazoo. The most interesting solutions are the things that help you actually use the data to create value that you can understand. And there's a lot of new technology coming to help marketers do that. And it takes a little bit of time to go find it, but if you focus on use the data that you have, then your CFO is going to be a whole heck of a lot happier.
I think that there's a lot of wisdom in all those responses. What I'll add real quick, just as we wrap up, is I think the notion of data as being a strategic asset is something that is increasingly coming into view for more enterprises. And just as we've sort of touched on briefly, more organizations are going to be putting resources towards doing the planning work up front, thinking through the use cases, validating what the potential impact could be on the organization, and then building the structures to use data in support of those use cases as the technology and other tools sort of come into alignment to make it possible. That's a major transformation, but if you're going to really tap into this inherent value that big data, whatever that is, presents to us, I think that's an important prerequisite. So with thanks to our esteemed panel, I think, Steve, do we have some time for some questions?
We have time for a couple of questions.
I'm Mark. I'm from Google. I'm just wondering if you see any canonical use cases from your clients. I'm wondering if there are parts, common questions that you see across all of your companies, where you could use that as an example that could help other people understand how exactly to think about data.
I have one canonical use case. What I think of is what is the single most important piece of data that you have, and it's actually true for every single marketer. One piece of data you have that's more important than anything else, which is how much your customer spends with you. And so when I think about use cases, when customers talk about big data, what are all the different options, all these different companies that have data, what data should I use? The question I always ask is, the first problem you should solve is understanding how your marketing investments impact what your customers spend with you. And if you don't have that bit of data organized, let's work on that first.
And another one for me, or I hear a lot, is offline attribution to in-store sales. Always trying to figure out how do we make a bridge from what we perceive to be all this engagement and movement we're getting in the digital to what actually may be happening where the registers are ringing. You know, there's a lot that Experian's been spearheading on helping do that area, so it's something I have to talk about a lot.
Yeah, I think the attribution is one, and then personalization is another big one that I'm hearing from a lot of clients. And I think personalization that spans the gamut from, you know, personalizing in aggregate for your product offering to segments, micro segments, and all the way down to individuals.
Shameless plug from the Moderator. We published a white paper on data use cases about 1.5 years ago, which I recommend you read. One of our conclusions is that there's literally hundreds of addressable data use cases today. One of the most surprising among them, well, I'll start with the prevalent. Perhaps the most prevalent in the digital landscape comes down to retargeting, which is very basis. It's an opportunity to re-engage with a customer who has abandoned a shopping cart or somehow or another lost their expressed interest in a brand or product or service. I think there's a working assumption that that's the way a lot of people are using data, and it represents a relatively unsophisticated approach to it. What we found through our research is that a lot of people look at data as a basis for both targeting and personalization of their marketing communications, but also the enrichment of content on their own properties, and finally as a basis for just understanding more about the customer, not as a driver for marketing purposes, but as a driver for product development and sort of upstream strategic decision making in the company. And ultimately, I think that positions the marketing department to sort of grow in its level of influence in the organization, because it sits at the confluence of these inbound data streams, the technology used to process it, and then finally those insights that power those kind of decisions.
We have time for one more.
Just real quickly, with big data being where it is. Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Peter Smith. I come from a company in New Jersey. We're a startup called iPredictus. It's a data convergence platform. But my question really is about the C-suite and how you're getting the internal silos within your organizations. Not only, we know what's going on externally with your competition in terms of getting the data, but in terms of getting internally, getting the CEO and the CIO and the CMO and everyone on the same page so you can ultimately drive the outcomes which you speak about so frequently.
For us, we'd want to start the dialogue with the CFO. So in terms of looking in the marketing, what's happening to all of us right now, budgets are being squeezed. In terms of what the CMO is dealing with, the CFO is a hugely more relevant conversation for all of us. So in terms of whatever we do, we have to really begin the dialogue with what the business impact's going to be in financial terms.
I think it's going to depend on who your client is and what type of organization you're talking about, but there's also another opportunity to come in at the ground level and find a smaller opportunity to test and do something that doesn't require C-level sign-off, prove it out, and it's much easier to come in and say, look, we just did this and it got you X amount of return. It's much easier to then sell in a larger scale investment. So if there is an opportunity to come in at a smaller level to do a test, that's also an opportunity.
To go on to Marcus's point, there are literally two views of the world in this use case, right? One is if you read the Gartners of the world, they'll say the CMO and the CIO will be indistinguishable by 2018, or there'll be a report of that nature. And then obviously you know that all of this requires money, so you need to get the CFO sign off. We've seen both these things happen. Literally, we've seen the CFO use case, and we've also seen the CIO use case. And in the CIO use case, consulting companies, folks again like Sapient, they do a bunch of groundwork. But I guess the only thing, it's not very instructive as an answer, but the only thing I can suffice to say is that the CMO by himself or herself is insufficient. You either need another C-suite person, sometimes as the CFO or sometimes the CIO.
I would offer just quickly, and this is a bit of a shameless plug for personal skill set, so I apologize for that, but screening data scientists for their ability to communicate with these C-level folks. And that's something that I think is rare, but I think it's something that actually distinguishes a good data scientist from just sort of a traditional analyst.
But didn't they say quant is the sexiest job right now? being a quant is apparently the sexiest job. So
Marketing data scientist, I believe, is the.
I don't know what that means, though, sexiest job, but you know.
Jonathan, panel, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.